OceanGate announced that it is suspending all exploration and commercial operations after 5 people tragically died on the Titan submersible's expedition to the Titanic last month.
The company announced the suspension at the top of their website. Washington, D.C. correspondent for NewsNation, Kellie Meyer, is here with us to discuss. Kellie, I suppose this seems kind of obvious that this would be the next step following the tragic deaths that took place, but I don't know, maybe not. It seems like this company had a history of not taking safety concerns very seriously.
Yeah, and I mean, we pretty much could have anticipated that they were going to, suspend all this exploration and commercial operation after what happened, that ill-fated trip where those 5 lives were lost, including the CEO of the company himself, OceanGate founder Stockton Rush. But there's just so many questions. I was up there the week it happened and went to Boston and was there talking with folks at the U.S. Coast Guard Boston when we found out that the submersible exploded and imploded. And we're now almost nearly 3 weeks since then. And there's still so many questions as to how this really happened. You hear a lot about that titanium end caps with the carbon fiber hull. You hear that a lot talked about when people are sharing stories about this situation. We don't know if that was, something that caused this. There have been experts critical of how they manufacture that and put that together for the submersible. There's also saying that, Stockton Rush may have attempted to abort the dive and resurface when they realized that something was wrong or had some type of warning. But they're trying to go through now just the debris and potentially, the human remains to find out more answers if they can as to what happened, and then try to use that for exploration going forward. We don't know the fate of the company itself, OceanGate, what kind of investigations they themselves are facing. And then, of course, there's beyond that more sea exploration and how they're going to kind of try to do this more safely going forward across the board.
So what do you make of this conversation, given that you are close with the Coast Guard? I mean, these are public dollars funding the hopeful rescue, but also potentially collection of remains of the folks that were on this submersible. Also, Stockton Rush was someone who was very much against government regulation of this kind of ocean travel and made that trade-off of carbon fiber for titanium. So it seems to me that public dollars are bearing the cost of this CEO's reckless behavior and how he ran the company, and also the hobbies of people who have $250,000 to spare for a joyride on the submarine. What do you make of the conversation around the use of public dollars to go after the submersible in this case?
Yeah, and it seems like there's this, really an international investigation into this, because this is, at the Titanic, like the Titanic wreckage site. So I know there are really no rules around, who that area belongs to. So it's kind of like the wild, wild west in terms of what area takes jurisdiction. So we know that Canada Transportation Security Board is investigating this, the U.S. Coast Guard and our Transportation Safety Board as well, including others, because there was multiple international clients on board the submersible. So you see a lot of different countries trying to find answers to this, not only the U.S., but of course the U.S. is also digging into this because there were American lives on board and the American company. And I think, there was a lot of questions around the dollars, especially in that first week when there was so much hype around the story and hoping, you remember folks hoping that they would find these missing 5 alive in those first few days where we didn't know the answers. So there was a lot happening. I remember they were trying to push more resources to this and sending in, I think 2 military helicopters that also cost a lot of money per hour to get those flights to bring in the rescue equipment. So the main total, we just don't know yet. But I think there was just so many eyes on this around the world, and then people just wanting to know the answers. So we'll have to wait and see how much this totals to. But it seems as though this isn't ending just yet in terms of the investigation. It may take, weeks, months, even more time than that to find out exactly what happened here. So that does mean a more costly investigation.
Is this sparking a larger discussion as well about regulation or potential regulation of privately funded exploration? We know that this is happening in the realm of space as well. Could this be maybe the turning point for the ability of these companies to have non-regulated, non-government affiliated space flights or dive teams or other related exploratory efforts?
It's interesting that you asked that. I did talk to one oceanographer, someone that that does dives as a part of the Titanic, Titanic Inc., where they do the museum tours around the world and exhibits and that kind of thing. And he dives himself. He was a friend of the French diver who many were talking about. His life was lost on board the Titan submersible. And he was just saying, it's unclear really what the future of sea exploration looks like after this event. But when you talk to many of those who are involved in that community and are deep sea explorers themselves, they say that this is something that they hope doesn't end, that we need to keep exploring these deep parts of the ocean in a safe way, in a regulated way. So whether this brings up a bigger conversation, even in places like Capitol Hill, of regulations for companies like this, I think that's something that we'll be watching. I'm sure going forward, we'll see some sort of congressional hearing on it, questions from senators and Congress members, and maybe some legislation on this. But as we said too, with the Titanic, it's a wild, wild west again. Like, you don't know who that area belongs to in terms of that specific area, who can legislate, who can and make some rules around what happens there. It's just a free range. When I was talking to that oceanographer, he says anybody could go down and try to retrieve something from the ship. It's not regulated. So there's more questions around that. And just because no one's really claiming it, that international waters where the Titanic is. So there's a lot of questions around that as well.
Thank you, Kelly. I was wondering your just general thoughts on what would happen if we were to take this approach of, okay, we have this regulation in place. You can't do X, Y, or Z with this submersible. You can't build submarines with this kind of material. You can't take passengers down in the submarine unless you sign a waiver that says we're not going to use public dollars that will come and save you. If you want to privately contract some kind of insurance if anything goes wrong, that's fine. But if you're going to operate in the way that Stockton Rush did and preferred to and was vocal about it, then okay, you need to sign this waiver that public dollars that could be going towards saving people who will abide by the regulations aren't going to go towards rescuing you. I guess this would probably have to be the case with just you just said the jurisdiction problem. If the corporation was based in the United States, the regulations would apply, and this kind of agreement could happen so that the travel could happen in the private sector and the free market without public dollars being on the line.
Yeah, and maybe that's something they'll do going forward. It remains to be seen now how they're going exactly to, regulate this going forward. Like you said, maybe if they do put that on a waiver and then it's on the company if something should happen rather than on the public, that may be something they take a closer look at. I'm sure there'll be some sort of, waiver drawn up or law or some sort of restriction potentially from this. But I think it's still so early in the process. I think right now it seems the focus is on finding out what went wrong. So then they could say, okay, this is what happened. Maybe this is what needs to be done. And I think that's still going to take some time.
On the question of the benefits of this type of exploration, I'm generally in favor of exploration, but what is the potential value of seeing the Titanic wreckage? What valuable information are we gaining from these types of private exploration efforts?
Yeah, and I mean, in terms of something like the Titanic, that seemed as though that was more of a historic dive, seeing something like this. I'm not sure what kind of more information they could collect from that. I know that one diver was going down and collecting memorabilia and things like that, but there may be things that they could take away from that. I'm not too an expert in that area of what they can retrieve or take away from that kind of exploration, but we know that this was more of a tourism kind of dive that they were on, at least in this circumstance. But I think in terms of the larger deep sea exploration, which is what I believe the oceanographer I spoke to was referring to. Besides these kind of tourist dives, something like the Titanic, which is still, I guess they could take something from that as well. But they're saying largely looking at other parts of the sea that haven't been explored. I think they were saying, we explore space, but there's so much of the ocean, like 90% or something, that hasn't been explored that we can learn things from. So on that side of it, more of the educational side, I think, is what they were saying.
Thank you so much for joining us, Kellie. We appreciate it.